So good morning to everybody, or good afternoon, depending on which part of the world you are. I'm Stefania Romano. I'm the coordinator of Transformative Urban Nature Action within the UNC FAO Forestry and Timber section, which is within the Forest, Land and Housing Division of the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. I will be moderating today's session, the Informal Expert Network on Urban Nature, and I'm particularly glad to be moderating it because of the topic that we are dealing today. First of all, I mean, many of you already know that the Informal Expert Network on Urban Nature is specifically a forum where stakeholders and experts share knowledge, peer-to-peer learning, capacity building experiences on nature-based solutions and urban forestry solutions to be taken into policy recommendations. So you might also know that the UNECE launched years ago in 2019 the Trees in Cities Challenge, which is a pledge for mayors across and internationally for trees planting. The ultimate goal of this very network is not necessarily to be having a high number of cities into it, rather to be exchanging, to be discussing with our cities, to be learning from our cities, to be identifying necessities and priorities of our cities. And in fact, this is what happened a couple of months ago when having a discussion, a talk, a meeting with Cole from Denver City and County, that talking to him about the city's needs, it came up the idea of delving into and talking about trees health protection. It is widely known nowadays that planting trees is good, less known and less discussed how the health of trees is important. And today we are going to be having two major speakers from our side. One of them is called Mr. Cole Agenbrod, forestry staff assistant from Denver Parks and Recreation. He will be presenting Denver City case study. And the other one is from Dr. Robert Haight, research forester, USDA Forest Service, St. Paul, Minnesota, USA, identifying, delving into pest management and plant health care, good practices for cities. So as you can see from the agenda, yes, we're going to be having experts in the field and examples in the very topic, but mostly we are opening up the room for questions, for answers, for discussion. So there will be plenty of time for it. So be ready and get ready. With that said, I will pass the floor to Cole, as I told you, is the staff assistant for Denver's office over the city forester. Just to give you a little bit of background about his professional profile, Cole received a double Bachelor of Arts degree in sustainability and a Bachelor of Arts in the Western Individualized Studies program through the Miami University. He's done a TEDx talk, which I also saw, Cole. It was very interesting, in fact, on the impacts of urbanization and the importance of creating space for wildlife in urbanized areas through the utilization of ecological corridors, and individuals utilizing native species on their property to help restoring lost habitat for displaced animals. His master's in geography from the San Diego State University, focusing on investigating the complex pathway that leads to non-native species becoming culturally invasive. So I think he's of a big value having Cole with us today, and we're very happy and glad to be hearing from him about Denver City's case. Thanks, Cole.
Thank you so much, Stefania. I am very excited to be here, very excited to be presenting. Let's go ahead and begin. So, that out of the way. So hello and welcome. Thank you so much. I'm excited to kind of present a little bit of kind of a case study of the city and county of Denver. We are not necessarily a normal area where you're going to find a lot of naturalized forests, and I kind of want to present how even if you're dealing with potential difficulties, you are able to have an urban forest that is something that is something to be proud of. So Denver's urban forest is really complex in the amount of people that actually have hands on any of the trees. The main area where people are actually interacting with it is Denver's forestry through operations, regulations, and programs. We would oversee effectively 90% of the trees within the city that are going to be touched. But you also have within the city the Parks and Recreation program, which may be overviewing their own trees or potentially having hands on them within the actual parks. Then we have something that's really uncommon, which is mountain parks. So we have land that was either gifted to us historically or land that we've acquired over time that isn't connected directly to the city and county um, and is potentially upwards of 50 miles away from the city's borders. But we maintain it and we take care of the land. So you're looking at hundreds, if not thousands, of acres of actual mountain forest that we are also in charge of. And that's treated a lot differently than the trees down here in the city. It's usually a tree will never be touched by a human when you're up there. And then finally, we have the Climate Action Sustainability and Resiliency program, CASR, and that group is kind of an amalgam of many things. They are able to interact with trees that aren't necessarily in the purview of the city. They can work on private property trees and either help with plantings, help with treatments, something like that. And then beyond that, we have a bunch of third parties that are adjacent to us or that are sponsored by us. For instance, the Park People is a nonprofit organization that the city works with directly that helps with planting in underserved areas and giving away free trees or reduced price trees as well. Denver Water, not affiliated with the city, has access and treats a lot of or takes care of a lot of the trees that are on the waterways. Then you have Xcel Energy, the power company, which will do clearance pruning, things like that. And then we have our private contractors as well, which is a whole program. There's about 190 private contractors that we work with that go through a certification program with the city. And they're ideally someone who is more informed on any of the issues that the city is facing, and we can utilize them as another set of eyes to see if there are any problems that are occurring. So just to kind of give you an overview of what Denver's looking at, we have about 36 centimeters of rainfall a year. We're the Mile High City. We're sitting at just a little over 1,300 meters, and we have a very wide range of temperature. We're looking at anywhere from negative 31 degrees Celsius at our all-time low, all the way up to above 40 degrees Celsius at our all-time high. So there's quite the range, quite the level of stress that is put on the trees just naturally. In fact, most of the area in Denver does not naturally sustain an urban forest. When Denver was first founded, you would find about species or five species of native trees that were predominantly on either the reservoirs or were on the natural waterways that already existed, other low-lying areas. But for the most part, anywhere else where it wasn't near water, a tree wasn't able to grow. So we're looking at contending with 90 to 95% of the space not uh, being able to handle naturalized or native trees. So that is something that we are constantly fighting against. Um, to give you an idea of what we're looking at right now, this is just kind of a basic example of how we have a lot of lower diameter at breast height trees, so a lot of smaller trees, a lot of younger trees in our urban forest even now, and then a general kind of spread of what we're looking at as our most common trees that we have. Really, I think where we should start is the historical aspect of Denver. So we were founded in 1858, and you can see in this top left image right here, this is an artist rendition of the time of what you would be looking at, which is a lot more correct. You're looking at a lot of plains, you might get low shrub, and the trees are mostly around the waterways. Where we start seeing the first major push, which you can see kind of down in this area, for tree planting is with Mayor Spear, who between 1905 and 1912 gave away 111,000 saplings through his tree planting program and really kicked off kind of the Arbor Day tree planting. Unfortunately, at the time, it was between two species of trees, which ends up setting up problems later on. We end up with a monoculture of ash trees. We end up with, well, basically, you end up with a monoculture of trees, and it ends up becoming a problem in the future. We kind of continue this planting theory into the 1950s. We're looking at a lot of people after World War II coming in, buying homes, and then wanting to plant a tree that's going to look nice, that's going to grow very well. And that choice ends up being silver maples. As time goes on, they also start introducing the red maple variety, which ends up crossbreeding into autumn maples. And autumn maples end up having the problems of both the silver and the red maples. So you end up with a tree that has chlorosis, that has a manganese deficiency. We're in a high pH soil, and what ends up happening is it grows very well, looks very nice, but over time it ends up hollowing out without you necessarily being able to see the signs, and then it shatters in the snow. As well, we end up having a lot of elms that are planted in the city, and Dutch elm disease was introduced around the 30s and 40s into the United States and ends up hitting Denver in the 70s. So we end up looking at a significant loss of canopy in the 70s from DED that we end up having to contend with. And even more recently, we're looking at, not in Denver specifically, but in the surrounding areas, we've had the emerald ash borer come into the area. Fortunately, not currently in Denver, but a good example is what has occurred over in Boulder County. They refused to treat for emerald ash borer, and unfortunately have lost a lot of their ash trees because of that. So the point I'm trying to get to is we are currently planning, or historically we have been reactive in how we interact with the problems that we have been given, either through new introduced species, new invasive species, new diseases, anything like that. However, now we kind of have our lens pointed forward, where we are able to create a little bit more efficient plans. So, for instance, with the emerald ash borer, we saw that coming in the early 2010s, and we started treating ahead of time. We had created what is called the Be a Smart Ash program, BASA, which focused on removing small growth ash trees and treating like larger DBH, anything over 12 inches, that was in good condition or above, to be able to protect them. And right now, we've kind of had the good fortune of being shielded from any of the emerald ash borers, even though they are popping up in communities around us. So with the Be a Smart Ash program, we have included multiple parts to it. It is not just removing ash trees, it is also replacing those and giving away either free trees or reduced price trees to homeowners. Usually it's free trees. Um, and being able to replace that canopy with a lot more diversity. And that's what we've been focusing on recently, is increasing the diversity of our urban canopy. So if we do come across another problem where we have a Dutch elm disease or an emerald ash borer or any other borers that end up coming in, one is not going to affect 50% of our canopy. It's going to potentially affect 10% or less. And it's something that we can more easily manage. So for instance, in the 1970s, we had dealt with the Dutch elm disease in the early, and that kind of went on for a few decades. In the early 2010s, that's when we stopped seeing any cases of Dutch elm disease. However, now, just this year, we've seen a few cases pop up. So we already have in place a plan for how we are going to handle any this kind of reappearing and make sure that we don't have that same level of spread and we don't have to do the same level of removals. At the same time, we have our own plans for the emerald ash borer. We we do not shy away from treating chemically, which I think is something that is really important because we can see from our neighbors as an example case study of what happens if you do not want to do the plant healthcare route for treating for these pests, just because they are so prevalent and the trees in this area are already drought stressed, they're already heat stressed. And they're in a very urbanized environment. They have so many stresses for them already that by not giving them a chemical treatment, you are effectively signing their death warrant. So that's something that we're really trying to avoid. One of the ones that we're looking to in the future, which hasn't come here, is the spotted lanternfly, which if you're in the United States, you've probably seen quite a few news stories and like the bug squashings and all of that that have been occurring. Encouraging the community to interact with this invasive species and kill them if you see them on site. Potentially, they are not going to be able to live in our climate. Potentially, they are. So it's something that we have our eye on to see as it progresses towards Colorado to see if it's going to actually be a problem. But some of the things that we're doing kind of in advance, not only of the spotted lanternfly, but just in general, is we're looking at utilizing more naturalized trees in the area, increasing our diversity. And there are a lot of strange intricacies with how many people have their hands on trees for the most part. The forestry in Denver has been working on creating a urban forest strategic plan, basically a one size fits all rule set that everyone can utilize both within the city and outside of the city that interacts with our trees as kind of a this is the best practice as we currently understand. That way everyone is kind of on the same page and interacts with the trees in the same way. But where we have moratoriums on trees, so for instance, we don't allow the planting of tree of heaven, Siberian elm, Russian olive. There's like the red autumn or autumn blaze maple. There's a lot of trees that we do not allow planting of on the right of way, so on the roadways, just because of the shape of them. They block line of sight. So there's a lot more of the technical city side of things that we have to care about as well with these trees. So we can't have a more low to the ground bushy tree on the right of way where potentially it's blocking a stop sign or a stoplight. So you get a lot of more complex interactions, which I'm sure a lot of you have had to deal with. Um, and then what we do require is with the contractors that work in the city, we have them go through both a written test and a climbing test, and meet with them annually as a group, just to kind of be like, these are the current issues that we're looking out for. So like this year, we will be mentioning, hey, Dutch elm disease is coming back into the city. If you see this, we highly encourage you to reach out to us. That way we are able to put a stop to it. It's not something that they need to treat for specifically, but it's something that we need to know the progression of, and be able to kind of get out ahead of before it actually becomes a problem. And that's been kind of the city's shift in how we interact with these issues, is being able to be a lot more proactive instead of reactive. So effectively, that is kind of the change of pace that we have been utilizing here in the city. And I think it's something that really allows us to maintain a healthy, diversified urban forest in a place where it's not something that should exist on its own, but it's something that's still incredibly valuable, and something that we definitely need to attempt to keep a hold of as best as we can. So being able to use all of these different methods and different vectors of being able to treat trees, having multiple people with eyes on it, even outside of the city, and basically being able to formulate these plans has allowed us to kind of create a little bit more of a safe space for our urban forest and be able to protect our current canopy cover and ideally keep growing our canopy cover, because we have our own goals for increased total shade, increased total canopy, and increased diversity that we are trying to hit. That is both within the urban forest strategic plan that is currently being created, and within the goals of both the city forester within the Denver Parks and Recreation and within Denver as a whole. And that's kind of our entire plan that we have going forward into the future, one that's a lot more proactive. So that is what I have as my little presentation for the city of Denver and how we're able to maintain this urban forest in a place that's kind of honestly hostile to it, especially as we increase urbanization effects and we end up with more of these invasive species or disease vectors that are affecting the trees that are already stressed. So with that, I'd love to open up any questions that you have. I have a few of my coworkers that are in the chat as well that might be able to potentially reply to anything that I am not able to.
Thank you so much, Cole. So interesting to be just hearing from you Denver's case. I thought it comes to my mind when we had that very discussion months ago that the real commitment and passion, I would say, from you and your staff and your team about how to be protecting, how to make trees within a safe space. So it's a very good example of, although and in spite of the fact that the climate, the environment might be hostile, as you said, there is solutions, there is experimentations, there is like ways to just go around it and make it happen. And with this, I think we can just open the floor for questions, any kind of questions that the audience, the participants, the experts, the different stakeholders would like to make to our expert, to Cole. You can raise your hand. You can write in the chat box, please.
As we wait for any questions to come in, one thing I do want to say on the experimentation side is actually directly across the street from me is called Vanderbilt Park. And it is a park where we basically do experimental trees, new cultivars, things that we haven't gotten a hold of. And it is effectively an experimental park where we plant these trees, treat them as we normally would in a park or parkway, water them, treat them as they are needed, and see basically how they're able to handle the environment that we're in. And if they do very well, then it's something that we put on our recommended tree list. Andres.
Yes, hello,
Yes,
Cole. Thank you
Hello.
so much for your presentation. Really good information. I was wondering, for how long have you been treating your ash trees?
Our ash trees have been since I want to say 2012 or 2013. And that's basically the entire span of our BioSmart Ash program since we've had Emerald Ash Borer confirmed in Colorado.
Do you do it biannually or annually?
So there are, I believe, 7 treatment cycles, and it's basically 7 groupings of trees that are in good health throughout the entire city. And it is something that is done biannually.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much. I was also wondering if you will be if you will allow to start planting like emerald ash borer resistant species that are maybe coming. The new signs are created, or maybe these Dutch elm disease, elms resistant species.
Yeah, so that's the thing with especially like the experimental park right across the way.
Mm-hmm.
As those become more available, like admittedly an emerald ash borer resistant species, um, that might be a little farther out to being widely available. But absolutely, if we can prove or have good evidence that it's going to be something that uh, that can end up handling both the environment, not be problematic in any other genetic predispositions that it has for our uses, then yes, that's absolutely something that we would be looking into.
The last
Eh,
question, Cole. How
Yes.
aggressive is your watering program due to the circumstances of your geographic location?
So it is pretty decently aggressive. We have a lot of our nursery staff that is going out into the evenings. So starting at 6 in the morning and going home at 5 in the afternoon. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and especially in an area where potentially there's been damage to the watering systems, they're going out with their water trucks and making sure that ideally there's water getting on everything. But I mean, we always need more water and more water on the trees than what we have.
Mm-hmm.
But we're doing at least 50 gallons on a tree, and we're usually doing the ones that aren't so established. So you're looking at like 6-inch diameter at breast height and below is kind of where we're focusing our watering efforts. But I mean, you'll definitely see some of the larger trees getting it depending on what the situation is.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for your time, Cole.
Yeah, thank you so much. And then I see from Medina, do you consider about citizens, for example, pollen that they might have? Uh, I might have missed that part if you had it. Let's see. For uh, let's see. I might not necessarily understand the question. Um, let's see. Oh, and then they left the chat as well. Um, that might be a little bit of a translation error on my part. I'm not necessarily sure how to answer that, but they're also gone now. So if anyone else has any more questions.
Most likely it was a kind of translation. But in fact, it would be very interesting to be learning from you whether there could be a kind of citizens involvement, like educational programs
Yes.
in tree health, specifically topic.
Yes. And this might be one where one of my coworkers is able to answer just a part of this a little bit better. But there certainly is a public interaction aspect. There are a lot of groups that are here within the city that are a lot more involved with the urban forest, and so they're going out and one looking at trees. Yes, thank you, Brian Edgar. They're called community foresters. And we have a little bit of a kind of a training program for them, and they are able to reach out to us with concerns. I know a lot of them have been looking into wanting to be able to prune some of the issues on trees that are a little bit more easily reachable, not something that requires them to go get a climbing harness and go climb a tree, nothing like that. But certainly there's a lot of people that are able to interact with these, and um, uh, we have what is it, a program that we are a part of, which kind of works with people who are currently in or just getting out of prison and basically want to learn a skill set like forestry where they're able to kind of get a training from us alongside some of like the park people, um, and get a little, be able to either go into a government job or go into the private sector. So that's something that we help with as well.
Right. Oh,
And then
that's so important.
I think Daniel, you had your
Yeah.
hand up first, and then I'll get to you, Duncan.
Thanks so much, Cole. It was a fantastic presentation. And I really liked the number of ways that it's the holistic approach that you have to engaging the community and all the different private sector companies that are working also not just for the city, but in private properties. And you mentioned one of your biggest challenges is the number of people who touch trees. And I don't know if that was in terms of a coordination challenge or in terms of contamination challenge or both. And so in that regard, I was curious a little bit to what extent your efforts in terms of who's touching trees also extend to managing who's allowed to work in the private space on private properties, if there's any control that you have there to try to reduce, I guess in this case, more the contamination side.
Yeah, so it's with the forestry subgroup that's here, we're all on the same page. Everyone else starts acting like the Parks and Recreation, Mountain Parks, and Kazar end up acting kind of on potentially a similar page, but there might be a little bit of difference between them. And then you have the third party people, especially Denver Water and Xcel, who have very different reasons why they're interacting with trees. Xcel is purely for clearance. Denver Water is purely for keeping the waterways clear and safe for their own utilization. The private contractor side of things, we have a complete control over who is able to interact with the public right-of-way trees, and ideally with some of the private trees as well, where we have not only a climbing test but a written test, basically for them to understand or show proficiency in the requirements that the city has for them. So you can't just be someone who goes out and fells a tree. You have to know that, hey, you have to ask for a permit from the city. You have to get permission. You can't just do things on your own accord. And beyond that, you have to be able to show that you know how to treat a tree. You are able to answer basic questions about the urban forest, and also show that you're able to do it safely. So that's kind of the control that the city has in that aspect. But yeah, it's basically there's a lot of different moving parts that we're trying to get all in line, and that's definitely been a challenge over time, but I think is something that the communication has been a lot better over the recent years, and that we're in a lot better position. And then yes, I see that my coworker kind of responded to your question. I do want to say, let's see, how long do you plan to plant ash or treat ash trees for? Is this a permanent program, or will it run its course? In some areas in Eastern Canada, the goal of the ash tree treatment program is to delay mortality so that the trees can be removed and replaced within the municipal capacity. Right now we have funding. Yes, we have funding going to the end of 2025. Potentially, we are looking at another cycle, which would kind of push us out into early 2032. Ideally, that by that point, we can start weaning down the program where we have potentially still the ash trees that are highly valuable, where they're very established, and we're looking at the 12-inch diameter breast height and above, or potentially more. It's going to really depend on what the city ends up choosing as kind of the cutoff point. But the Be a Smart Ash program as a whole is kind of it's time limited, and it potentially needs a vote in 2025 to continue it on. But we're not going to just be like, all right, and now all the ash trees are going to be removed, because that would still be a significant portion of our tree canopy, and it's not something that we would be willing to lose, especially after having invested so much into it.
Thanks. And I can see that additional information is being written by your colleagues in the chat.
Yes.
Which is very informative as well. If I may, Cole, ask you the last question before we move on to the next speaker is, do you foresee any emerging threats to trees' health in the coming years?
Yes, on two vectors. One is just kind of the continued variability within the climate. I mean, we're seeing as time goes on, the climate patterns with climate change have been significantly strange. We've had years where we're in full, like the worst level drought that we have on our measurement tables, where we're getting effectively no rain for months on end within summer months, and the trees are highly stressed, to potentially something like this year where we had our annual rainfall within the first 6 months, and really kind of focused within about a 3-month period. And with that, I mean, it's great. We get a lot of tree growth. We end up having a lot of problems with signage or stop sign clearance because all of the trees push out a bunch of leaves. But in that same capacity, even when we're getting that increased amount of rain and we're relatively lower in our, like we had a later start to our summer. Now we're seeing potentially Dutch elm disease coming back because the moisture allows it to propagate within our urban forest. So even when we do get, in this case, better rain and cooler temperatures, at least for part of the year, it's still a problem. And if that isn't going to be the case, then we are kind of on the trajectory of reduced total rainfall. We're on the trajectory of hotter summers on drier summers, and that's going to stress the urban forest as well. So a lot of the planning is kind of going to be around that, being able to, one, diversify your species, but two, hopefully have a very resilient canopy that can take kind of this level of punishment, because I mean, you're looking at a 70 degrees Celsius swing in potential temperature. You are looking at potentially less than 25 centimeters of rain in a year, or even lower than that. So it's a lot of dealing with that, and the fact that that's going to stress the trees out means that any other problem, like potentially the spotted lanternfly, emerald ash borer, Dutch elm disease, any of the other potential diseases that we already have, are going to end up being even magnified in the level of them affecting our urban canopy. So it is a multifaceted approach to being able to handle the problems that are kind of presented by this.
Yes, climate change was a multifaceted problem that we've been trying to be approaching and addressing accordingly. And I mean, local efforts is a great case as much as international collaboration, like what we are trying to be doing. Thanks Cole for this amazing presentation and informations and enthusiasm about your job. We need experts like you. And now I know that Cole is also very interested to be listening to the next presentation before starting the webinar. In the background exchanges show this great interest into the next presentation. So it's my pleasure to be introducing to you Dr. Robert Haight. It's going to be discussing about good practices within the context of managing emerald ash borer invasions of urban forest. Dr. Haight is a research forester emeritus within the U.S. Forest Service, Northern Research Station, located on Temple campus of the University of Minnesota. Dr. Haight earned a PhD in forest management from Oregon State University in 1885. And joined U.S. Forest Service Research in 1887. He studied the economics of wildlife conservation, wildfire management, and invasive species management. What is interesting is that Dr. Haight is currently developing guidelines for incentive programs for landowners to protect their trees from damaging insects and diseases. So Dr. Haig, the floor is all yours.
Yes, thank you, Stefani, for the invitation to speak. I'm very happy to be here. I'm just going to do a quick check. Can you hear me okay and see my screen? Okay, great. Well, welcome everyone, and thank you for attending this morning, and greetings from St. Paul, Minnesota, in the north central part of the United States. I'm going to build on Cole's excellent presentation from the city of Denver and talk about managing insect and disease infestations of urban forests and use emerald ash borer as an example. First, I'll provide some background about EAB infestations of urban forests. Next, I'll describe planning guidelines that have been developed by state agencies for use by community forests and as they plan for EAB. And then from those guidelines, I'll describe in general terms good practices for planning for any type of infestation. Urban forests include trees growing on private land where homeowners have a wide range of objectives, some of which may not be consistent with city foresters' objective. A problem that hasn't been addressed very much is how to design incentive policies for landowners to manage their trees in ways that are consistent with the goals of the urban forester. And so in the third part of the talk, I'll describe a model for designing tree care incentive policies for private landowners. So emerald ash borer is an invasive wood-boring beetle native to Asia and accidentally introduced in North America in the 1990s. EAB was first detected in US near Detroit, Michigan in 2002 and has since spread widely throughout the eastern US. I know many of you know a lot about EAB already, but I'm just going to go over the basic biology and management of it now. EAB females lay their eggs in summer on the trunks and branches of ash trees of the genus Fraxinus. Larvae hatch from eggs and tunnel beneath the bark to feed on the tree's xylem, and then adults emerge the following summer and feed on ash trees in the canopy before mating and laying eggs and repeating the cycle. Following initial attack, ash trees look healthy for 1 to 2 years and then exhibit canopy decline as larval densities increase. The trees are girdled by continual larval feeding and usually die within 3 to 5 years following initial attack. EAB is capable of spreading to nearby trees through adult flight. The primary means of long-distance EAB spread to new trees is through the transport of firewood and other woody material from ash trees. And these two photos exemplify the damage that can be done in urban forests before EAB and after. Since its discovery in 2002, EAB has spread widely, killing tens of millions of ash trees. And because of its extent, EAB is one of the most economically and environmentally damaging invasive species ever to reach the United States or North America. The most expensive damage caused by EAB is in cities where ash trees have been planted for decades along streets and in homeowners' yards and in parks. One study estimated that over $10 billion would be spent from 2010 to 2020 on ash treatment, removal, and replanting by local governments and homeowners. In response, researchers developed an integrated management strategy called SLAM to address EAB infestations in cities. The goal of a SLAM project is to slow the onset and progression of ash mortality by slowing the growth and spread of EAB populations. SLAM management includes surveillance to find infested trees coupled with insecticide treatment and removals within the bounds of an infested area. And Cole mentioned parts of this kind of strategy that is currently being employed in Denver. Surveillance is important because newly infested ash trees are asymptomatic while they foster the production of EAB adults that spread to neighboring trees. The most common is systemic insecticides are injected into the base of the tree, as shown in this picture here, in the spring, and then translocated via the xylem to canopy branches and leaves, where they kill both adult and larval EAB. Studies have shown that this insecticide treatment provides at least 2 years of nearly 100% control of EAB, provided that the tree is in the early stages of infestation or healthy when the treatment begins. In addition to insecticide treatment, another management option is to remove infested trees before the EAB adults emerge. While researchers developed effective practices like SLAM for EAB management, agencies developed a bi-level planning process for emerald ash borer. In this process, each state published EAB management guidelines, which in turn were used by community foresters to develop local EAB management plans. So in the next set of slides, I'm going to focus on the guidelines published by the Minnesota Department of Agriculture, pictured here, and show how they were used in the community forest of Elk River, Minnesota. The first step in developing management guidelines is to gather information about the organism's biology and possible management tactics. Using that information, the planner then reaches out to community members to define management objectives and discuss the strengths and weaknesses of management practices. Minnesota planners develop guidelines with the objectives of slowing the spread of EAB in infested communities and slowing the spread of EAB to areas of Minnesota that are not yet infested. The second step is to list the management tactics recommended for community forests with different levels of infestation. These tactics include planning, inventory, monitoring, treatments, removals, wood utilization, replanting, and biological control. For each management tactic, suggested activities depend on the community's level of EAB. Not infested areas are communities where EAB has not yet been found, such as Denver. Generally infested areas are forests where EAB infested trees have been found, but trees have not yet been killed by the insect, such as Boulder, Colorado, as Cole mentioned. And then heavily infested areas are places where ash trees are dying from EAB, and the EAB population is sufficiently large enough to kill trees faster than they can be removed, such as the city of St. Paul, where I live. The management guidelines recommend actions to take under each tactic, depending on the infestation level of the community forest. For example, in this slide, the treatment tactic is probably not appropriate for uninfested communities which aren't close, in which EAB is nowhere nearby. However, treatments are appropriate for generally infested communities, or where a community is close to a neighboring city that has EAB. And for heavily infested areas, treatment is probably too late to have any effect. The third step of the planning process is to inform community foresters who are responsible for developing the forest management, their local forest management plan in response to the threat of EAB. A local management plan should address each of the tactics listed in the previous slide, and the selected actions depend on community involvement, the management objectives of the community, and budget constraints of the planners. I emphasize that citizen communication and collaboration is a primary part of local planning. Citizens can provide assistance with everything from inventorying trees, detecting new infestations, properly disposing of wood waste, replanting, and more. Just as every community is different, every EAB management plan will be different and will depend on the level of forest infestation. For example, this slide is a summary of the EAB management plan for the city of Elk River, Minnesota, which does not have any known infestations. The city is preparing for a EAB using tactics to slow ash mortality once EAB arrives. The idea is to spread the impacts over many years as opposed to a relatively short amount of time, which creates a more manageable financial situation and also allows for an orderly transition of a community forest with fewer ash trees while maintaining the benefits provided by the existing tree canopy. And I think Cole and one of the listeners mentioned this was a common kind of strategy for cities in Canada. So I'll wrap up this section with a high-level list of best practices for pest management planning. First, employ a bi-level planning process in which regional guidelines are developed for local management plans. The regional guidelines identify management objectives and tactics, and different management tactics are recommended for different levels of community forest infestation. Finally, the regional planner facilitates the adoption of the management guidelines by community foresters who develop their local management plans with input from their community neighborhood groups. Note that most of the tactics identified in regional management guidelines are meant for trees on public lands, such as trees along boulevards, in public parks and forests. Very few tactics are aimed to help private landowners manage their trees, yet private trees are an important part of any urban forest. It's well known that a tree growing in my yard benefits me, the homeowner, and it benefits my neighborhood and the community at large. Many homeowners undervalue their tree because they don't value the neighborhood or community benefits. Further, they may not be aware that, for example, an EAB infestation on their property will threaten their neighbor's trees. And as a result, many homeowners underinvest in tree care. So the question that I'm addressing with my colleague from the Forest Service, Dr. Andrew Tillman, is how can subsidies be optimized to align public and private incentives for EAB insecticide treatment? So we developed a model of optimal subsidies for treatment of ash trees threatened by EAB. The model designs subsidies that depend on tree health, the current level of community forest infestation, and uncertainty about homeowners' tree values. The policy design targets privately owned trees that are unlikely to be treated, and the policy results in unified management across public and private land. As you'll see in the following slides, the model focuses on the management of a single tree. Further, the model recognizes that there's three players in the policy design: a municipal forester who sets the subsidy level for treatment to maximize the benefits of the community forest across public and private land, an arborist in a private tree care firm who sets the price of treatment given its subsidy to maximize its profits from tree management. And the third player is the private landowner who decides whether to treat their ash tree or not, given the price of the treatment, to maximize the benefits, their own benefits. The model begins with an assumption that all of the players have prior knowledge of the likelihood of 3 tree infestation levels: healthy, treatable EAB infestation, and advanced EAB infestation. Then the municipal forester or arborist assesses the tree's crown condition and uses that information to update the prior likelihoods of the tree's infestation level. It's important to note that the tree's crown condition is not a perfect predictor of the infestation state, and that there is some error in the estimation. Next, the municipal forester selects the subsidy level for each infestation state to maximize the community forest benefits. Next, given the subsidies, the arborist of each firm offers a price to homeowners to treat their tree to maximize the firm profits. Finally, the tree owner selects their preferred option, given how much they value their benefits from the tree that they receive from their tree and how much it costs to do the treatment. Technically, we used a backwards recursion algorithm to derive the optimal behavior of tree owners and firms and to reveal the subsidy policy that results in socially optimal management of private trees. We determine the conditions under which the subsidies are warranted from the perspective of a municipality and find that the optimal subsidy levels depend on the assessed health state of the tree, but the subsidy level should always be the same across firms. Lastly, the model is consistent with EAB management plans in cities that strategically treat their publicly owned trees, and then they negotiate with tree care firms to offer discounted prices for insecticide treatment to private tree owners as an incentive to protect their ash trees and sustain the ecosystem services associated with the trees. We use our model to explore optimal subsidy levels, treatment survival probabilities, and expected municipal utility levels in a case study for the city of St. Paul using parameter values obtained from the literature of EAB. Our results are presented using triangular plots with color coding representing outcomes across all possible community forest infestation levels. The lower left vertex represents a community forest with all trees being healthy. The upper vertex represents a forest in which all trees are infested, and the lower right vertex represents all trees are dead or dying. Each point in the triangle represents a vector of proportions of a forest in the three different infestation states. This triangle represents the optimal subsidy policy for an assessed healthy tree growing in a forest with different levels of infestation. Lighter shades represent subsidy levels, higher subsidy levels. So here, trees assessed as being healthy will be subsidized for treatment with about $100 when most trees in a community forest are healthy, and then the subsidy declines to zero in forests with more infested and or more dying trees. The triangle to the right represents treatment probabilities of an assessed healthy tree as a function of the community forest state and given the optimal subsidy level. Under the optimal subsidy policy, an assessed healthy tree will be treated under most underlying forest infestation states. In other words, the triangle is almost all yellow. Here, the far right triangle represents the treatment probabilities under the situation where there are no subsidies. And note that the landowner here treats an assessed healthy tree when the forest is all or partially infested, even without any subsidy. Comparing the right hand and the middle triangles, you can see that the optimal subsidy increases the treatment probabilities in forests composed of more healthy trees, where private tree owners wouldn't otherwise treat their trees. And this slide shows the optimal subsidy policies and treatment probabilities for assessed infested and dying trees to complete the analysis. Note that the assessed infested trees in the middle row are likely treated for most levels of community forest infestation with no subsidy, whereas dying trees are largely not treated and slated for removal. And this is my last slide to wrap up the latter portion of the talk. The take-home messages from this analysis are as follows. The public subsidies can help private landowners protect tree health, especially when landowners' tree value is less than the community forester's tree value. And as a result, optimal subsidy policies unify the management across public and private lands. Optimal subsidy levels are dynamic and depend on the state of the community forest infestation, the tree health state, and uncertainty about how the tree owners value their trees. We found some situations where landowners will treat their trees without any subsidies, and in these situations, it's not socially optimal to subsidize their treatments. Finally, the structure of the subsidy policy depends on the market for tree care services. In Minnesota, we found that cities contract with tree care companies to provide services for public lands, and these contracts can be amended to include subsidies for private tree care, for landowners' tree care, which will be passed along to the landowner in terms of reduced tree care costs. Okay, so with that, I'll wrap up and say thank you, and then turn it back over to Stefanie for questions.
Dr. Haidt, thank you so much for this very informative and detailed presentation. I have been learning specifically about tree care management, how to be slowing down the spread of pests through treatments, plans, guidelines, techniques, promoting, encouraging the collaboration of citizens, funneling into proper funding, but also optimizing subsidies. With that said, I think that it's due to be opening the floor to questions from the audience. I'm sure that there will be a lot of questions coming up. Thanks again, and let's open the floor for the questions. Okay, Daniel, please. Colleague.
Thank you so much. Really enjoyed the presentation, especially the final part where you kind of bring it all together with how do we move the needle going forward at scale. This is something that's come up a lot in our network, is how do we engage community? And I think until now we've heard about soft tactics. Not that this is a carrot, it's not that this is a stick, it's still more of a carrot, but it's now you're putting budget on the line in what you're talking about with the subsidies. So one question I thought it might be interesting to expand on a little bit is, first, there's this three parts. So first, where's the information coming from for your assessments? Is this basically modeled to work with iTree? Is it something that can be adjusted by a city based on whatever inventory software that they're using? Second, is this something that's already kind of something that could be aligned with the Inflation Reduction Act money for urban forestry, for example? Is this something that could be channeled from even the national level through the states to cities and towns in the US? Or is this something that you see more being driven in another way? And three, what is the share of a city budget that would be needed for urban tree management that would be needed to provide the optimal subsidy? I mean, I know you're looking at a case study, but this is why this is hence the question about federal funds as well. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Daniel. All three are excellent questions, and the first question is in assessment information. How does a city gain their information about the health status of their urban forest? And there's just a wide range of practices out there. So, for example, my city of St. Paul, their urban forestry department regularly drives the streets of the city. They know, okay, so first of all, they know where their ash trees are. They have a map, a digital map of their ash resource that they obtained through iTree, I believe. And then they actually drive and inspect those trees every spring, looking for woodpecker damage and other signs of emerald ash borer presence. And then, given the presence of the ash trees, they make like neighborhood level determination of what their actions are going to be. And again, these are for boulevard trees that are growing along the streets. So yes, the assessment information, and then also I'll also say one more thing is that they have an active website where they publish regularly their findings of their assessments. So so private landowners can know what the status of emerald ash borer is in their local neighborhood. So that would help them, the local landowners, make their decisions about what to do about their own ash trees. You mentioned urban forest funding and funding for community forests, and this is not my area of expertise, but I do have sort of a few general things to say about it. And one is that the state of Minnesota passed legislation recently in which they appropriated about $15 million that could be applied, that could be used for grant money to cities to improve the health of their community forests. So there is a sort of a bi-level process going on where states do provide funding for local community forestry through a grant and aid process. You mentioned the Inflation Reduction Act, and yes, in as part of that act, tens of millions of dollars were appropriated for community forestry projects, and that those it's also a granting mechanism administered by the U.S. Forest Service, state and private forestry, in which community groups can apply for grants to update to do community forestry. So there are mechanisms in place in which funding from state and federal institutions, state and federal governments are being used to fund community forestry, but at the same time, there's just not enough, for every worthy project. And then the last question you asked was, how much does it cost a community to engage in a subsidy program? And to be honest, I don't know yet, and we're still developing the subsidy programs and engaging with a couple of partners in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area to come up with options for particular cities to do this. And I don't have numbers in hand to say how much it costs. I will say that right now, there are a number of cities in the metropolitan area where I live that when they contract with tree care firms to manage the public trees, they require that the tree care firm provide a discount of maybe 5 or 10% to homeowners for the cost of the applying treatment. And so if you added up that cost, it would be in the cost reduction would be in maybe the tens of thousands of dollars for a moderate sized city. So I don't think it's going to be that much, very expensive. Okay, so Daniel, that was a long-winded answer to your very excellent questions.
No, I was just gonna say thank you. It's very challenging, and I think it's quite interesting to think about how the subsidies will work. One of the biggest challenges we hear from our network as well is we have money now, some money for tree planting, bit of a push from some of the international attention to climate change and trees as a solution, but we don't have as much money for maintenance. So finding mechanisms to support that and fund that, I think, are critical. So that it's fascinating work. And I mean, I'm curious also to hear from some of the cities on here today about whether you have the funds for this sort of treatment approaches that we've been hearing also from Denver today.
Yeah, especially treatments by private individuals. How do you incentivize the individuals to care for their trees?
Yes, we can see the comments in the chat. There is no money for planning, which has to precede everything from one of the participants. If anybody else would like to come into the discussion, please feel free to. Maybe one last question that I may ask you, Dr. Haight, is what are the future trends or research areas in the tree health protection that we should be aware of?
Can you repeat your question? I missed. Yeah.
Yes. What are the future trends of research about tree health that you think would be interesting to be knowing about?
Okay, well, I think one area that I think needs more attention is in international trade and how to inspect and biosecurity kind of questions, like how can a country protect imports or inspect imports to protect against the importation of non-native insect and diseases. I think that's currently I know that there's international programs, and the United States the U.S. Department of Agriculture has a really active protection service, but I think more needs to be done to protect against sort of the unknowns that could possibly come in on, say, live plant imports or solid wood packing material and such. I think more research needs to be done on community preferences for different kinds of treatments and removals of urban forests, because I think there's a wide range of views about the acceptability of of insecticide treatments and tree removal processes. So, you know, there needs to be some effective way to understand what those preferences are and build them into local management plans. So I'll stop there. I can probably,
No,
I think of some other ones, but those are the two that come to mind right off.
We know that you could talk forever, and so
Yeah.
interesting to be just listening to your insights. So biosecurity and community preferences, among others. I think that we should slowly start to be closing this very interesting webinar. I'm sure that our audience got excited about the very useful information provided by our experts. So I would like to thank with that, first of all, my colleagues, Daniel and Sarah, because we just pulled all this informal network session together. Starting from a very informal discussion with Denver, as I was saying before. So I would like to thank Cole for this fantastic idea, but also Mr. Cole Hagenbrod, officially, institutionally, but also Mr. Dr. Robert Haight from his very technical and specialized insights. Thank you very much. I really do believe that the informal expert network on urban nature is the place where, in fact, discussion happens. And we will be keeping you informed about the next steps and the next topics that we will be dealing with. Thank you again, and stay tuned.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Cole. Thanks, Dr. Haight.
Goodbye, everyone.